I had been in the brig several times, and I'd been arrested as a juvenile, but it seemed like after I got back out on the street, every time I turned around, I was the one going to jail. We'd be in the bar having a good time. If a fight would start, it seemed like I'd be the guy going to jail. I just couldn't keep my mouth shut, I guess. Spent a lot of time going to jail.
This is The Bottom Line. I'm Gary Thiemann in Los Angeles. For the alcoholic, denial is such a big obstacle. As Pat will attest, he has to recognize and come to terms with his disease. You've got to surrender and admit you're powerless over alcohol. This is Pat's story.
I'm Pat. I'm an alcoholic. I was born in Los Angeles a long time ago, 1937. I was basically raised like everybody else until my mother passed away. My mother died when I was about 8 years old, and my dad just didn't know how to take care of us. He was an alcoholic, practicing alcoholic. He practiced 2 years at a time. You could set your calendar by the old man. He'd drink for 2 years, then he'd quit for 2 years. Then he'd drink for 2, then he'd quit for 2. He'd build his life up while he wasn't drinking and get things going pretty good. Then he'd decide he needed a drink, and in 2 years we'd be back on the street. Well, that was my dad's cycle, and that's the way he did it. After my mother died, I was about 8 years old when she passed away, and Dad just couldn't hang on to us. He couldn't work and drink, and there was 2 brothers. My oldest brother went to live with my grandfolks, and Tom and I, well, we ended up in an orphanage in San Francisco, and things moved pretty, I don't know, you can't call it normal. After into the orphanage, I was a small person, little dude, 4'11". It seemed like everybody's bigger than me, and they picked on me a lot. And I was getting in fights, and I was in trouble, just basically all the time. Then one day I stole a bottle of whiskey. I'd gotten out of the orphanage into a foster home, and I stole this bottle from my foster parents. I was going to sell it to my brother. I got as far as the corner with it, and me and my little buddy started sucking on this quart of, I don't know what kind of whiskey it was, but it was whiskey. And it went down so smooth, and it didn't burn. I thought, I was waiting for the kick you see in the movies and all this. I guess I was 13 then. And it just went down smooth. We went to a movie that evening. You had to have an adult to get in. We got this guy to get us into the movie, and just the name of the movie was Bitter Rice. This was way back 49, I think. And just as this woman was getting off a train, we were sitting in the balcony, and in the movie, this woman was getting off a train, and another woman come up and grabbed her and split her blouse open, and her breast popped out on the screen, and I vomited all over the lady in front of me. We was sitting in the balcony. I was right over the top of her head. And her boyfriend was upset about that, and he just proceeded to knock hell out of me. And I woke up the next morning, and it was okay. I was beat up pretty bad, but the kids at school thought I was some kind of a hero. And I remember how big I felt, while I was drunk. I wasn't that little guy that they could push around. And I couldn't wait for the next chance to drink. And that seemed to follow me all the way through my drinking career. It was just, from that point on, I looked forward to the next chance to drink. And then, of course, I got into the military, and that was a freebie. They paid me to drink. It seemed like I had nothing to do, but nothing to spend my money on, but booze and party time. I was in the Far East, a couple of cruises over there, and I stayed pretty well bombed. I re-enlisted after 4 years, and I had had so many captain's masses, so many summary court-martials that they didn't want to let me re-enlist, but they were finally talked into it, and I got to ship for 6 more years, but I only did a year and a half of it before they threw me out for my attitude. I was drinking drunk all the time. I still didn't figure it was my fault. They sent a letter to my wife saying that I just couldn't conform to military life. I just couldn't sober up long enough to conform to it. Way bad. There I am back out on the street, and I had been in the brig several times, and I'd been arrested as a juvenile, but it seemed like after I got back out on the street, every time I turned around, I was the one going to jail. We'd be in the bar having a good time. If fight would start, it seemed like I'd be the guy going to jail. I just couldn't keep my mouth shut, I guess. Spent a lot of time going to jail. I remember going before a judge in 1969. I was arrested for drunk and disorderly. And I remember that in 1959, I'd been arrested in the same town, Culver City, California, for the same charge. So when the judge asked me if I'd ever been arrested before, I said, "Yes, Your Honor, one time." And he said, "Well, I count 15 times. And I couldn't believe that I'd been arrested that many times, but I had. And that was way back in '69. I proceeded to get arrested about 10 more times before I ever got my first drunk driving ticket. And it never seemed to slow me down. I got 4 of those within a year after I got my first one. They just went back to back. But it didn't seem to bother me none. I always had a good excuse, good reason. Good reason for drinking, because nothing went right in my life. I was married early while I was in the service, and then after I got out of the Navy, we got divorced, and I remarried real quick, and I managed to go through 5 wives up till my first wife called the program Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me tell you this. My first wife called the program Alcoholics Anonymous for me in 1961. A guy and his wife came out and 12-stepped me. Took me to AA meeting in Culver City, and I thought this is okay. I found out I wasn't crazy. I was just an alcoholic. I was sick. And my wife found that out, and of course she was a lot better to me after she found out I was sick. I wasn't crazy. When I'd get drunk now, she'd say, "Poor baby, he's just sick. It isn't his fault." And I milked that as long as I could till I finally burned that up. I think she went to Al-Anon meeting or something, but I come home one day and everything I owned was out on the lawn. And so I had nothing to do but move on down the road and to my second wife, and then a third wife, and then a fourth wife, and a fifth wife. And my fifth wife was throwing me out of the house, and I decided to try AA again. This is in 1979 to see if I could keep my wife and keep my job. And I managed to do that, got her back in my good graces, and AA worked for me for almost 2 months. I wasn't working the program, I was just working my wife. And after a while, I was back drinking again, and she threw me out, and then I ended up in a town called Lancaster, and I ended up sitting on the curb wondering what happened to me for the umpteenth time. I was trying to sell vacuum cleaners. Not a very good job for me. I'd been in construction since I got out of the service, and I was so nervous now I couldn't hold a hammer in my hand. But I was attempting, because I couldn't hold a hammer in my hand, I was attempting to sell vacuum cleaners. It'd take a pint of whiskey to get up enough nerve to knock on a door.
Pat tried to quit drinking for all the wrong reasons. Trying to save a marriage, he quickly found out that, of course, he had to save himself first before anything could affect the marriage. But working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous gave him a very new beginning.
I was trying to sell vacuum cleaners, and I met this little lady. She just got out of the hospital, and she told me about AA. There was a club there in Lancaster, and it didn't impress me too much, because I didn't, if I ever get that bad, I'll go. But, right now I'm just a total mess if I ever get worse. I had a habit of thinking that. If I ever get that bad, I'll go to AA. Well, this one morning it was 6 o'clock in the morning. It was after I had talked to this lady about a month later. I got thrown out of a bar at 6 o'clock in the morning. They opened up and threw me out. And I'm on the street. It's Sunday morning, and this guy that manages a vacuum cleaner place. He's usually good for a couple of bucks. So I was on my way to try to find his house in my old truck, and I saw this recovery house that this lady had told me about, and I remembered it. I remembered across the street where I was at, waiting for the light to change. And when I turned the corner, I saw a gal emptying some trash, and I asked her if there was AA around there anywhere, and she says, "It's right here, honey. Come on in." So I went in there, and I sat down, and I sat there all day. They had a meeting. I didn't know it was in the other room. And I was about to give up on AA when I got up to walk out. A fellow was coming through the door. He extended his hand to me and shook hands with me and said, "Let me buy you a cup of coffee." And the man probably saved my life. We went back in and sat down, and we talked about my problem, and he told me about his. And I went to my first serious AA meeting that night. I was seriously considering getting sober long enough to get back on my feet so I could do the whole thing all over again. And I started going to the meetings there. My old truck was parked there by the meeting hall, and that's where it stayed. And I slept in the truck, and I'd fall out of the truck, go into the meetings. About the fifth well, actually it was the fifth day, I heard a guy across the table from me. I had never seen him before, and he was about 20 years younger than me, and he was telling my story. He was coming right from where I was coming from. And I could feel this feeling that it might work for me. He was looking clean, and he had a job, and things were going good for him. And 2 years, he had been sober 2 years, and 2 years before, when he came through those doors, he'd been in the same shape I was in. And I think that's when my eyes opened up a little bit, and I thought to myself, well, maybe if he can make it, I can make it. And I kind of said a little prayer right then. I asked God if I could have a couple of years. And it seemed to work for me as long as I went to the meetings. And I started going to the meetings, and I went to the meetings and went to the meetings. And by this time I was living with a fellow that was allowing me to remodel his house for room and board. So I was out of the truck, and I actually was eating and living in a home. I had a bed, and things were looking pretty good. And like I said, I stayed sober for 30 days, and that was usually about as long as I could go. But I went to this meeting, and the fellas were talking in this meeting about, this was the night I got my 30-day chip. They were talking about how they prayed, and it was like they just talked to God instead of the set prayers that I knew that I had learned as a child, And I always figured that you had to be real formal when you talked to God. And this was kind of amazing to me, the way they were talking. And when I got home that night, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. But I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going to turn myself into the police because I had too many warrants out for my arrest. And I told God that, I would go to any length to stay clean and sober, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to turn myself in. Well, as strange as it may seem, the next morning about 10 o'clock, I was being booked into the county jail. It seemed like I had driven my old truck over to meet a fellow about doing a job, and he hadn't showed up. And while sitting in the truck, this lady noticed a strange truck outside of her property, and she had just the night before had a neighborhood watch meeting at her house. They told her, if you see strange vehicles or strange people in the neighborhood, call the police. So she called the police, and they come out, checked me out, found all these warrants, and away I went to jail again, that black and white bus. And that last arrest was when I truly found God as I understand him today.
Pat's newfound sobriety put him on a spiritual path that led him to enormous gratitude, one day at a time.
On this bus heading to, they had to take me from Lancaster to Los Angeles. They booked me in in Lancaster, and then they took me down to the county jail in Los Angeles. I was on the bus. We're cuffed up, and it's a lot of noise and racket going on the bus. And if you've ever been on one of these buses, you know it's not very comfortable. There's a lot of noise, and everybody's hollering, screaming, yelling. And I just managed to close my eyes and say a prayer. Never done this number before. The only time I prayed was to get me out of this one, God, and I'll never do it again. Well, this time I just closed my eyes and I said, God, please help me. And I got comfortable. In the middle of all that noise and confusion, I couldn't believe the comfortable feeling I had. And I think that was where I first actually realized that I had a higher power that would work for me if I would just ask. There was no problem with my God. If I just asked, he would be there for me. And I found that to be true. And, within 13 days after this arrest, I was back on the street, you might say, and all the warrants were picked up. It took me a couple of years to pay off the fines, but I didn't have to do any time. I was back at the club in Lancaster after they had shuttled me around the state of California, and I got off. I ended up back in Lancaster, back in AA, and doing my best to stay sober. I found that through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't have to take a drink today. And I ask God every morning, I thank God every night that I don't have to drink today. God created this program, I know he did, for little drunks like me. He spent all these years trying to get the message through my hard head, and I just couldn't seem to get the message, no matter what. If it was a preacher talking to me, or a wife, or my dad, or my brothers, or my family, or anybody, couldn't get the word across through this thick skull that I needed God in my life. And I wouldn't pay any attention to that. I knew I'd burned all the bridges. I was going straight to hell, and there was no reason for me to even consider God in my life until I found this program. That God had created this program for me and people just like me so that he could speak to me in my own language. And when I sit in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellow sitting across from me says, "We, by God, don't drink in Alcoholics Anonymous," and tells his story, and to me it's God talking to me, and it's getting through this thick skull. And all of a sudden, I'm getting the message that God couldn't seem to get to me any other way. He had to put another drunk in front of me. And I could listen, and I could relate, and I could hear, and I could understand, and I could say, wow, this is really the truth. And I could stay sober. And without God, I know I'd be back out there on the street. To me, God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous are synonymous. I turn my back on the program, I turn my back on God. And once I do that, I'm back out on the street. And it's not just me I drag down. I take my family with me. I have 3 kids by my first wife, and they're all grown and have their own children now. They never quit loving me. They just quit liking me for what I was. And today they love me, and I thank God for that. I have a new wife now and a new family, and things are good. Things are good. I got my contractor's license back, and lo and behold, I'm in business again, and things are good because I believe in God today, and I know that God's going to help me through no matter what. I go to my meetings, I pray to God, and I'm staying sober today. Thanks to the program Alcoholics Anonymous.
Once I stood in the night with my head bowed low in the darkness as black as could be, and my heart felt alone, and I cried, oh Lord, don't hide your face from me. hold my hand all the way, every hour, every day, from here to the great unknown. Take my hand and let me stand where no one stands alone. Like a king, I may live in a palace so tall, with great riches to call my own. But I don't know a thing in this whole wide world that's worse than being alone. Hold my hand all the way, every hour, every day, from here to the great unknown. Take my hand and let me stand where no one stands alone. Oh, take my hand and let me stand where no one stands alone.
You've been listening to The Bottom Line, featuring Pat's story. Pat, thank you so much for caring enough to share your experience, strength, and hope. Thanks for planting a recovery seed. This show is produced for Armed Forces Radio Worldwide. I'm Gary Thiemann. Until next time, God bless you. And share the message, won't you? This has been a GRT production.